Still room up in front for those who want it.
It occurs to me that if no one here knew me, I could kick off a couple of sexist jokes and then launch into a racist diatribe. And I could watch your faces, the look of growing horror, and then I could see people start walking out. And I think as they walked out, they would feel good in the sense that they made a stand against, what's a guy like that doing in a place like this? And the only thing I would say is this, that what if, though, I had deliberately spoken like that in order to make you walk out? You would actually have given your power to me, I would have manipulated you. Now, I'm not intending to do that, but I'd like to ask you how you would feel if I kicked off in this line. God, I'm going to need my spectacles for this. Okay. Hi. Just thought I'd challenge and disturb the comfy indolence of your minds with a provocative inquiry. With all your spells and deep insights into matters spiritual, and all your new age crystals and alternative therapies, can any of you people convince me that your semi-religious methods have any effect whatsoever? Science can offer you the staggering magic of the computer screen as testament to the validity of its method. But where are your proofs? Where are your triumphs? Where is the crystal that definitely healed a sickly person and didn't just provide vague emotional satisfaction? And so on. Now that was a posting that appeared on a website called UK Pagan in February the 4th of this year. And not surprisingly, it produced a reaction. People reacted to that, this obvious challenge. The first person, called Sunflower, said, "You obviously don't want to be convinced of the truth. For that I feel very sorry for you." Following that, there were rather more sort of thoughtful responses, but basically they all rose to that provocation. Now the guy who did it, he then went on to draw attention to a particular website called thecrystalchamber.net, tearing it to pieces line by line, showing how it was made up with bad science, false assumptions, so on and so forth, illogical statements. And still the people defended it, because they were reacting to this man. And then he dropped his bombshell that he'd created that website deliberately to show how gullible the New Age and pagan community was. Now, how did I hear about that? Because someone gave me a copy of the New Scientist of March the 1st, and there was a story under Transparent Balderdash. They loved it. Just shows what idiots people like you and me are. Now, they had thought it was a good story, basically. Now, what I would like to see is at the end of this half hour, I think, even among sympathisers here, there is a feeling that those UK pagan people have been made a fool of themselves. But I would like to suggest that the guy who made a fool of himself was the one who pulled off that stunt. And to give a clue as to the way I'm going to approach this, I would suggest a thought experiment. What if, instead of launching his attack on the pagan New Age community, instead he'd done it on the science fiction community? Now I should point out that I went to that website, knowing it was a fraud, and it was very good. I read about it, and I wanted a homeopathic crystal, after reading about it. I thought it sounded great, heal me. So what I'm saying is, let's say he wrote a science fiction novel, and it was so good that it won the Galaxy Award for Science Fiction Novel of the Year. And at the presentation ceremony, he stands up and he says, "Science fiction is bunk, you are a load of suckers, because I base that on bad science." Now, I'm sure that there are some science fiction purists who would say that science fiction must be based on good science. But for the public as a whole, surely they would say, no, the essence of science fiction is a very good story that somehow captures the style and the feel of scientific speculation and endeavour. They would say that guy made a fool of himself, he completely missed the point. Because we have this idea that science and art are different cultures. And it's been drummed into us since, C.P. Snow and the 50s in his work on the two cultures. Now what I'm going to argue today is actually we should be looking at 4 cultures. And to illustrate that, I'm going to fill 4 glasses with water.
very eyes, I can do a miraculous transformation, making these into 4
quite different and distinct objects.
Here, we now have a glass of water. Here we have holy water. Here we have healing water. And here we've got, as you can see, an oak tree.
Now, I've got to be very careful at this point. You see, I've just made 4 claims. And to punctuate this, I can imagine, you know, that there's this sort of nasty team of fiendish skeptics, probably headed by Richard Dawkins there, just waiting there to come in and prove that I'm a fraud and you are a bunch of suckers. Now, you see, I made a claim. I said I manifested a glass of water. In they rush, they take it to their laboratories, they test it physically and chemically, and they come back crestfallen. Because when Ramsey Duke says it's a glass of water, it is a glass of water. So the scorecard reads, 1 to St. Ramsey and none to the nasty skeptic fiends. Now we'll go to something a little more debatable. The oak tree. I read you something. In a room at the Tate Modern, there is a 3/4 full of glass of water on a high shelf. It is a work by Michael Craig Martin called An Oak Tree, 1973. Beside it, there is the following text. Question. To begin with, could you describe this work? Yes, of course. What I've done is change a glass of water into a full-grown oak tree without altering the accidents of the glass of water. The accidents? Yes, colour, feel, weight, size, etc. Do you mean the glass of water is the symbol of an oak tree? No, it's not a symbol. I've changed the physical substance of the glass of water into that of an oak tree. It looks like a glass of water. Of course it does. I didn't change its appearance, but it's not a glass of water, it's an oak tree. Can you prove what you claim to have done? Well, yes and no. I claim to have maintained the physical form of the glass of water, and as you can see, I have. However, as one normally looks for evidence of physical change in terms of altered form, no such proof exists. Haven't you simply called this glass of water an oak tree? Absolutely not. It's not a glass of water anymore. I've changed its actual substance. It would no longer be accurate to call it a glass of water. One could call it anything one wished, but that would not alter the fact that it is an oak tree. Isn't this just a case of the Emperor's new clothes? No. With the Emperor's new clothes, people claim to see something that wasn't there because they felt they should. I'd be very surprised if anyone told me they saw an oak tree. Was it difficult to effect this change? No effort at all. But it took me years of work before I realised I could do it. When precisely did the glass of water become an oak tree? When I put the water in the glass. Does this happen every time you fill a glass of water? No, of course not. Only when I intend to change it into an oak tree. Then intention causes the change. I would say it precipitates the change. And so on, ending with the words, how long will it continue to be an oak tree? Until I change it. You may, the man on the street might be an absolute Philistine and might think that art was a load of bunk and conceptual art absolute trash. But even such a person, I think, would say that when that team of scientists, skeptics, rushes in to do tests on my oak tree to show that it is just a glass of water, that they've really missed the point. 1 point to Ramsey Dukes and none to the skeptic fiends. You see, art is not the same as science. We've got these 2 cultures, and he understands that much. And I took quite an extreme example, but I just point out, if I were to quickly say, quickly, what is this I'm showing you? And I hope, even if I move my fingers so you could get the crib, enough people would say, oh yeah, of course that's the hay wain. We know it's the hay wain. Famous picture by Constable. Now, of course, it isn't the hay wain, is it? This is just a crappy bit of paper with a black and white illustration. The real hay wain is worth millions of pounds and it's in the National Gallery. Now, even that hay wain isn't really a hay wain, is it? It's just a piece of canvas with paint on it. But we respect John Constable as a great artist. And the miraculous thing is, not only is that bit of canvas now, the hay wain. But even a piece of paper, in a very real, like this, in a very real sense, becomes the hay wain forevermore. But I do have to be a little bit careful, because what I can't do now is sell you this as an important piece of conceptual art, vital to the British Brit art movement. And even if I got a copy of the hay wain, which was chemically and physically, as perfect to the original as possible, if I tried to sell it to you, I would be held up as a fraud and you as suckers, because in art, one of the differences between the two cultures, art and science, is that in art, it's not what the thing does, it's go right around. It's not what the thing does, it's what it is that matters. Whereas in science, it's what it is. What it does is more important than what it is. You see, I should point out that I poured that glass of water over there from a bottle which says water, so we know it's water. But actually, from a purely scientific point of view, it isn't verified as water until they've done tests and it's done the right thing. It's got to do the right thing. Whereas in the case of the hay wain, it doesn't matter how accurately I manage to reproduce the original, and it met all sorts of tests. It's actually, is it the original one that matters? What it is that matters. And that's one of the differences. Now I'm going to move to a slightly more dangerous area. This is holy water. Let me tell you the story of that holy water. I was in Rome yesterday and I met the Pope. It was incredible. I asked him if he'd bless that glass of water, and he did. And so it's holy water. Now in rush that team of skeptics, do their tests and say, it's only the same as ordinary water. Have they got a story? Now here, if we went back 150 years, Victorian times, Darwinism, the big challenge to science and religion, I'd say that's a real story that would have quite shocked people. And even 50 years ago, in the 1950s, you've got a sort of tabloid level story there. Scientists challenge the authority of the Pope or whatever. But nowadays, we've had the 1990s and all that talk about science and religion, and scientists saying they can still believe in God and all that. They would say, I'm afraid those guys have really missed the point. It's one point to Ramsey Dukes and none to those fiends. But I mustn't be too glad about my 3-0 victory, because unfortunately one of those skeptics finds out I wasn't in Rome yesterday. And they check with the Pope and he didn't bless any water, and my story begins to crumble. You see, in religion, as in art, it's what it is rather than what it does that matters. And if it hasn't been blessed by a priest, it isn't holy water. And I'm afraid it's one point to the nasty skeptics and none to me. So now we get on to the real battleground, this healing water. I got this from a sacred spring known only to me and a few adepts, and the planetary aspects were absolutely in order to concentrate the power. It's in rush that team. Water, do they have a story? Now, like the situation I described in the last example in the 1950s, trash documentary level or tabloid level, yeah, that's a story. Ramsey Dukes' healing water is no different from ordinary water. But interestingly, a more serious documentary or broadsheet expose of me, although they deny there's a thing called magic, they need to know enough about it to know that in magic, it's what it does matters, like science, rather than what it is. So what they would do is they would then test it, the double-blind test, and 1,000 sick people. And I'm afraid I could probably predict their results wouldn't be much better than chance, and it would be 1 point to the nasty skeptics and none to me. Now, I just say on that you might say, well, surely isn't holy water meant to heal? I just point out that actually that's a sort of a magical add-on, because if you gave holy water to someone to heal them and it didn't heal them, you wouldn't say, therefore, it hadn't been blessed by a priest. You're more likely to say, it wasn't God's will or something like that. So I insist that what it does is strictly magic. What it is more the religious thing. Now, the point that struck by healing water doesn't do very well in a double-blind test. But the interesting thing to me is that that double-blind test is quite an elaborate procedure devised to remove the very factor of magic itself, which is so important in healing. Because in a double-blind test, not only do the people getting the stuff not know whether they're getting the healing water or ordinary water, but the people giving it don't know which they're giving. And they won't know the results until after the results come out. Because you see, on my diagram, we've had what it is and what it does, but there's objective and subjective. There's a distinction between the left and the right. See, in the case of the holy water and the glass of water, what it actually is, whether it's been blessed by a priest or not, is an objective fact. And what it actually does it actually do the tests right? And that is an objective thing too. Whereas in the case of the oak tree, or what makes this into the haywain, it's a lot to do with our respect for Constable, and his reputation and things like that. And a similar thing applies down here. We need a magical link, in Crowley's term, to make this really effective. And you see, the strongest thing probably is if I really wanted to heal a particular person, to get them involved in the ritual I made with water. That doesn't mean I couldn't do it for anyone else, because what I could do is focus my attention on the person I was going to give it to in the ritual and make a strong magical link that way. Now that doesn't mean I couldn't market it on the open market, because what I would then do is what was done so well by that crystalchamber.net website, is I would package it with a description of what a fantastic water it is, what a great magician I am, what the spring it had come from, the wonderful aspects and all that sort of thing. So the person buying it makes the link with their commitment, their faith in what I'm doing. Does that mean then you couldn't give it to a skeptic or an animal? Same thing. Yeah, you didn't understand that. And the answer is that no, because then the person administering it, it is their intention to heal, which makes that link. In each case, there's some sort of strong subjective link, which is an important part. It's not everything, but it's an important part of magical alternative healing. And the double-blind test is a way of cutting out those very factors. Now, we take it for granted because we're so used to the scientific way, and it sounds so very sort of down-to-earth and hard. And I would say it isn't really, because real life is not hard in that sense. That's ivory tower hardness. And the analogy I have is a bit like trying to do the ultimate motor car test. You get two extremes like a Lamborghini and a family saloon. And you say, to eliminate extraneous factors, we're not going to put any petrol in the tank. And then to make sure it's really objective, we'll get the judge to be a boy from the Amazon rainforest who's never driven before, never seen a car. Okay, a marvellous subjective test, but what the hell has that got to do with the subjective experience of motoring and the reasons people buy a car? And an awful lot of these tests of magical phenomena or healing done by scientists are in that line. They're actually very far removed from the way we actually live our lives. I'd also point out that, I can point that out later. The other thing, it gets a bit worse than that, because it isn't just the methods which have this strong vein of subjectivity in them, it's actually the results. And this is quite a difficult one. You see, I can imagine, these sort of things happen, that a friend of mine goes down with a terminal cancer and has got 6 months to live, and I give him my healing water. Now, of course, something in me hopes that next time I see him, there'll be a staggering remission, the doctors are flabbergasted. The sort of thing that often happens is instead there's a tremendous change in the person's whole attitude. He may say, I've got 6 months to live, and there's so many books I want to read, people I want to meet, I'm going to do it. And all my life I've been fighting against something, I've been fighting against this disease. But now I actually know what I want to do for the first time in my life. And you say, doesn't it hurt anymore? Yeah, it hurts as much as ever, but I know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And when something like that happens, you know that your healing has worked. And it actually affects your own idea of healing. It heals you too. Now that is just the stuff which our original skeptic lumped under the thing of vague emotional satisfaction. And yet a thing like that can hit you like a ton of bricks, and it can change your life. These things are real. in real life. And we're used to the sort of the hardness of science. We take that for granted. But it too, if you look closely, is not really so clear-cut. Take my glass of water. We've got a very thirsty member of the audience who asks me for a glass of water, and I give it to them. A week later, they're dead. Cholera. I'm sued, and I say, oh, it's okay because those scientists told me it was a glass of water. He asked for a glass of water, so it's their fault. And the scientists would say, no, we were asked whether it was a glass of water. We weren't asked whether it was contaminated water. And another occasion I might say, if it's just pure water then, is it? And they say yes. And I say, okay, I'm going to give it to this silicon chip manufacturing plant because they need pure water. No, hang on a second, they would say. We don't know the international standards of purity that are required for a silicon chip manufacturing plant, and we can't actually tell if it's pure water or not before we know those. So, there's vagueness on that side too. But what I really want to get down to saying is that what we have here is a fourth culture. We've got art, religion, science and magic. And I say we really need to see them as four distinct cultures in the way that we've been brought up to recognise that science and art are two distinct cultures. And that's like political parties, where one can be in power in a certain area and another in power in another area. But the one can't eliminate the other. It might look like that with the present Tory government, but in general, one doesn't eliminate the other. And what I'm saying is that what we're seeing is a return to this sort of area. It's rising, it's coming back into power. And this example of that is if you go to a typical bookshop, count the number of shelves on the subjects of mind, body, spirit. There are probably more there than there are of religion and science put together. This is quite a significant thing. And yet people deny that there is such a thing as magic. And one form of denial is the people who are very much in this area. They see a very linear view of our development. Basically, they wouldn't use the word magic, but they'd say our primitive ancestors, because they were ignorant, did silly things. Now, if you keep doing silly things for thousands of years, you start doing them rather well. We call that art. If you go on doing silly things rather well for thousands of years and get more and more socialized, you begin to do them with authority, and that we call religion. And then, marvelously, sometime in the 19th century, we woke up, we discovered the truth, and now here we are, we know all about science. Now, see, if you have a view like that, then any movement back into these other areas is a return to a more primitive state, and that's quite threatening. And that's why we get these sort of, the joy of them proving, how stupid people like us are in New Scientist. Now there is also another group of people who recognise that something is shifting, a change is taking place. And I put them more in this area. I went to a talk by a person from the Centre for Post-Secular Studies. And what he said was that yes, we are moving away from this purely secular position and the sort of return and recognition of spiritual values. And what was interesting to me, he said, I'm going to talk about this in 7 contexts. And his 7 contexts were as follows: the new physics, consciousness studies, transpersonal psychology, postmodernism, the arts, I ran out of fingers, ecology and nature mysticism. And then he said, I was going to leave it at 6, but a friend absolutely insisted that I put in a 7th one, and it is the New Age and New Religious Movements. I do that very reluctantly. In other words, this whole area, which has, say, there's so many books on it, that he was seeing as a sort of an aberration down there. There's this return to a recognition of spirituality, but people who haven't been brought up with a proper spiritual religious education, they will fall back into this primitive mumbo jumbo. So that's the second theory. And then there's the theory that I propose in my book, SSOTBME, which is that we actually tend to cycle around this. And what we're seeing is a shift from here to here, and that this has happened in the past. Now, it's very surprising to some people, the idea that magic comes after science, but I said, it's happened in my own lifetime. In the 50s was a period of very high, we thought technology had all the answers, and yet it was followed by a magical revival in the 60s. And the same thing happened at the end of the Victorian era. strong interest in science, and then there was a magical revival. And more significantly, something like that happened 2,000 years ago, when the very rational classical era gave way to the Dark Ages, and there was a rebirth of mystery religions, alchemy, Gnosticism, things like that. And I say that that is what is happening. We're moving into this sort of area. And if people refuse to admit that there is actually a culture, a valid culture area called magic, then what we're seeing is they have to create 3 new categories in order to fill that gap. There's bad science, bad art, and bad religion. Bad science, you've got, there's a website of the pseudosciences, where they list things like homeopathy, astrology, Myers-Briggs, all sorts of things are clumped together as pseudosciences, trying to get the respectability of science. And I would say they're all in my broad area of magic. As magical theories, they work pretty well. Bad art. If you deliberately put, the way you would make a magical image like a tarot card, if you deliberately put together symbols for a particular effect, it tends to be dismissed as bad art. Like if you made a film for commercial success and you included, you had a handicapped child who rose to overcome a group of Nazis, and there was a car chase and a shootout on the roof, it would be dismissed as bad art. But I say, no, it's a talisman for invoking commercial success, and it should be judged as such. It's a piece of magic. And bad religion, well, I've just talked about that, the idea that poor folks like us, we don't actually understand real spirituality, and so we're doing daft things. So those are the 3 categories that we are having to fill up that big gap to stop us falling into it. Now, so what I've got there is 3 different theories of a change that's taking place in our society. And only one of those theories, which is my one, does honour to people like you.
So cheers!
That wasn't the one with cholera.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't got time for questions, although Ramsey's books are on sale on the Mandrake store, as with all titles that are a special offer today, so I think you can get SSOTBME and some of the newer ones for £10 each, which is quite a good bargain. And are you doing a signing later as well? On your programme there's a signing